Now, Florida's success has been made more difficult by the floundering federal establishment in Washington, D.C. Federal government has gone on an inflationary spending binge that has left our nation weaker and our citizens poorer. It has enacted pandemic restrictions and mandates based more on ideology and politics than on sound science, and this has eroded freedom and stunted commerce. It has recklessly facilitated open borders, making a mockery of the rule of law, allowing massive amounts of narcotics to infect our states, importing criminal aliens, and greenlighting the flow of millions of illegal aliens into our country, burdening communities and taxpayers throughout the land. It has imposed an energy policy that has crippled our nation's domestic production, causing energy to cost more for our citizens and eroding our nation's energy security and, in the process, our national security. It wields its authority through a sprawling, unaccountable, and out-of-touch bureaucracy that does not act on behalf of us, but instead looms over us and imposes its will upon us. The results of this have been predictably dismal. This has caused many to be pessimistic about the country's future. Some even say that failure is inevitable. Florida is proof positive that we, the people, are not destined for failure. Decline is a choice, success is attainable, and freedom is worth fighting for. Now, fighting for freedom is not always easy because the threats to freedom are more complex and more widespread than they have been in the past. The threats can come from entrenched bureaucrats in D.C., jet setters in Davos, and corporations wielding public power. But fight we must. We embrace our founding creed that our rights are not granted by the courtesy of the state, but are endowed by the hand of the Almighty. We reject the idea that self-government can be subcontracted out to technocratic elites who reduce human beings to mere data points. We insist on the restoration of time-tested constitutional principles so that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Florida has led the way in preserving what the father of our country called the sacred fire of liberty. It is the fire that burned in Independence Hall when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish a new nation conceived in liberty. It's the fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg when the nation's first Republican president pledged to this nation a new birth of freedom. It's the fire that burned among the boys who stormed the beaches of Normandy to liberate a continent and to preserve freedom for the world. It's the fire that infused the young preacher's dream, relayed at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that the Declaration of Independence said what it meant and meant what it said. All men are created equal. It is the fire that led a resolute president to stand in Berlin and declare, "Tear down this wall," staring down the communists and winning the Cold War. It is our responsibility here in Florida to carry this torch. We do not run from this responsibility. We welcome it. We will be on our guard. We will stand firm in the faith. We will be courageous. We will be strong. And we thank God and are proud to be citizens of the great free state of Florida. Thank you. God bless you. God bless this state and everybody throughout the land. So he goes to the border, and where he went was like an ungovernable shanty town. You had tents, people all over the place. It was totally unkempt, and it was terrible. And man, they swept that up. They bust those people somewhere else, and he's walking as if it's somehow fine. And so, you know, it was a total fraud what he was doing. But it goes back to our trial that we're having now, where these guys, once they were under oath with Border Patrol, whatever, you know, they basically admitted that these policies are intentional. And so when you see all the stuff happening, that is what they want to have happen. And that was one of the reasons why I was so disappointed to see that omnibus bill, because it did nothing to hold them accountable at the border. You know, you should attach provisions that say you must do Title 42, you must do Remain in Mexico, you must do all these things. And if you just put that in the budget or in the law, this problem would go down dramatically. But we are in uncharted territory for the number of people that are coming across. That's burdens on communities, healthcare, law and order, education, all that. But it also is causing massive amounts of drugs to be able to come in more readily. You have the cartels are having a field day, and you do have criminal aliens that are coming across the border that we know mean harm to people in the United States. So yes, ma'am. So it's my understanding in terms of CVS, Walgreens, I don't know about Publix, that they're not going to be offering that in the state of Florida. And so I don't think it's going to be an issue here because, you know, there's a lot of different rules and regulations that go into stuff like that. So that's my understanding that they were not going to be offering that. Yes, sir. United States with impunity and basically humiliate our country in the process. And so when you have policies that are that reckless, that impacts every state in this country. I don't need to tell people about the amount of drugs that have poured in to our country, particularly over the last several years. Yes, made in China, but brought across by the Mexican drug cartels. We had over 100,000 Americans die from drug overdoses last year. The vast majority of them are from opioids, including fentanyl. And this is not just limited, of course, to towns on the U.S.-Mexico border. This is happening all across the United States and communities in every corner of the United States. Now, in Florida, we have fought back, probably more than any state has fought back. And it's not just having 50 illegal aliens go to Martha's Vineyard. Now, that got a lot of news. They don't care about the other towns being overrun, but if you pierce their little cocoon in Martha's Vineyard, then it was like all hell broke loose. They got really upset about that, but that shined a light on this issue probably more than any single action has done. Of course, that was not even close to all that we have done. We had people in 2021 at the request of the Texas governor. I was the first state, Florida was the first state to answer the call for increased border security. We've also done things more recently as we started to see boats coming from Haiti and from Cuba, and the Coast Guard dumped like a couple hundred a couple months ago in the Florida Keys. So I declared a state of emergency, and the Coast Guard actually is good to work with, but Biden will not send additional support. So they're stretched very thin. So we declared a state of emergency, and we've surged our resources to help the Coast Guard. So you actually have Florida Fish and Wildlife, FDLE, our agencies out there stopping these boats from Haiti, and then we bring them to the Coast Guard. Coast Guard takes them and brings them back to Haiti. I mean, so that is something that when we did the state of emergency, you've seen a huge drop now in the number of vessels and in the number of people that have been able to make landing in the Florida Keys. And then the ones that did come, the Biden administration actually sent them to either California or Texas, so they weren't even released in our state. And you know, look, we would have arranged transport out of our state if they were released here, but that's that. So this we're having a great effect, and basically, I'm going to keep those operations going as long as they need to go. You can't just have hundreds of people dumped down in southern Florida and think that that's a sustainable thing. So we've made a big difference, and we're going to continue to make a big difference. But you've seen, even with us doing a lot of the stuff we've done, in addition to sending to down to Texas, in addition to the maritime interdictions, in addition to the illegal alien transport, we have done legislation and signed legislation cracking down on all government contractors who use illegal alien labor. We've also signed legislation prohibiting government contracts with any private entity that is facilitating Biden's policies. And you do have some of these, quote, nonprofit groups that are facilitating people coming through Mexico across our border. If you're engaged in that, you are violating the law, and you're not going to do business with the state of Florida. We've also signed legislation in Florida, just like most states, you got to be eligible, you got to be here legally to be able to work, but enforcing that can be difficult. And so, we have employment verification that we beefed up, not enough, and I'm going to address that in a minute, but we've been able to hold some of these businesses accountable who are knowingly employing illegal immigrant labor. We also signed legislation cracking down on opioid dealers and traffickers, including increasing the mandatory minimum sentence. When you're dealing in fentanyl, you're killing people. I mean, you talk about just a little bit, and this is done. And so people will lose a son or daughter who may have gone out and may have made a bad decision, but not even knowing that this fentanyl is in, like a drug they take or something, and then they die. And so you're knowingly doing that, knowing what the results are. So we're going to treat you like the murderer that you are. And I also petitioned the Florida Supreme Court in 2021 to impanel a statewide grand jury. And so these are things that we're able to do from time to time under Florida's Constitution. When I first became governor, we did one on the school security in the aftermath of the Parkland massacre, and that ended up leading to the resignation of the superintendent, replacing 4 school board members, a lot of recommendations to be able to. And we also did, 2021, we impaneled on illegal immigration. So we have a statewide grand jury impaneled now on illegal immigration. They can issue recommendations and issue reports, and they have issued some recommendations, and so we're going to be implementing some of those recommendations here today. But we need to do everything in our power to protect the people of Florida from what's going on at the border and the border crisis. And so we're announcing a number of, I think, really timely initiatives that we're going to be working with the legislature on to get this done in the upcoming legislative session. First, we're going to increase the penalties, and this is something that the grand jury recommended, increase the penalties for human smuggling. And so if you have people that are bringing into the state of Florida, people that are here illegally, it's going to be a 3rd-degree felony if you're doing that, and a 2nd-degree felony if they're aggravating circumstances. We also say that it's a separate offense for each individual transported, concealed, or harbored. And then when people are being transported, even though they may not have violated this, they're going to be detained as material witnesses. If you hold people accountable, they're not going to want to do this. But we need to update our laws to be able to get this done. We are also going to, so right now in Florida, you have to be legal to work, but businesses can either use E-Verify or they have the option of maintaining documents like I-9 or whatever. Well, that would require an audit to uncover some of the stuff. And so although we've been able to hold some accountable, it hasn't been effective enough. And so we're working with Blaise Angolia and the legislature to require all employers in Florida to use E-Verify to determine employment eligibility. And this will expand from our current requirements, which are just with public employees and with contractors with the state of Florida. But if you have the ability to have different types of enticements, you're going to end up having more people that are going to want to come illegally. If you remove the enticement of employment, then they're not going to want to come illegally to the state of Florida. So that's a huge, huge issue. Now, Florida correctly prohibits driver's licenses for illegal aliens, and we will continue to prohibit that. However, what local governments are doing is they're trying to circumvent that. They're trying to use nonprofits, use their funds, give money to nonprofits, and have nonprofit groups create ID cards for people here illegally. And that's just a way to try to evade the current state law. So our proposed legislation will prohibit that practice. Local governments will not be able to provide funds to issue ID cards to illegal aliens, and the legislation will invalidate all out-of-state licenses that have been given to illegal aliens. Florida's Constitution correctly requires you to be an American citizen, and that should be just an obvious thing. You see other places, San Francisco, New York City, now Washington, D.C., once illegal, or actually foreigners to vote, illegal aliens, or even like diplomats. Like, are you going to have some diplomat from the CCP voting in D.C. elections? I mean, it's insane what they're trying to do. So we don't allow that. And we've actually, with our election crime unit that I instituted with the legislators' help last year, you've actually seen illegal aliens prosecuted in Florida now for voting illegally, because some of them say, no one asked me. They just said I could vote, so I signed up and did it. So our bill will require, when you register to vote, that you affirm or swear under penalty of perjury that you are a United States citizen. And so if you check that box and you're not, then you're opening yourself up to prosecution. And we need to make sure that we want all citizens here that want to vote, but we don't want anybody here voting illegally. And if you're not a citizen of this country, you should not be voting in our elections. We're also going to require hospitals to collect data on how much it costs to provide health care to people in our state illegally. I mean, this is something that we estimate to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars range, but that's just the estimate based on very limited data. It may be much more, and that's one of the costs that we talk about people coming across the border illegally. Yes, some bring drugs, but most of them don't. Some are criminal aliens, but most of them are not. But even if you're not involved in any type of drugs, crime, going into communities you have millions now going across the country, that puts a stress on the education system, on public safety, and on health care. And I think you see that in every state, including the state of Florida. So we want those costs identified, and we want to be able to go to the people of Florida and let them know, and this is almost all uncompensated care that taxpayers are having to pick up, just what the costs of these border policies are. And then finally, one of the things that we're going to be doing is, I don't know why they did this in Florida before I became governor, but they're letting illegal aliens become licensed attorneys in Florida. It's like, how could you be violating the law and then be practicing the law? So we're going to end that practice to make sure that you're legal. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is, in the face of a failed federal administration, neglect at the border, honestly intentional of what's going on at the border because it fits their vision, we're fighting back on behalf of Floridians. And I think if other states mimic the proposals that have been put forth today in the proposed legislation that Blaise Angolia has, it's going to make a big, big difference. And it's really going to, I think, force the federal government to get with the program. and to finally secure and defend the borders of the United States of America. So we are going to be very happy to see this progress made here in the state of Florida, and it'll make a really big difference. You know, we have enough people that want to come from these blue states. We can't also take everybody from other countries illegally. I mean, it's hard enough. The state's getting very, very crowded. So, all right, we're going to hear from some of the folks with us here today. So first, we have the Commissioner of FDLE, Mark Glass. Part of the rule of law, part of public safety means that you have strong borders and that you're enforcing your immigration laws. If you look at what's happened over the past many years, we're seeing a deluge of fentanyl pouring in to our country. They say only the border town should care about it. I'll tell you, every state's a border state. Pennsylvania's getting fentanyl, Florida's getting fentanyl, and I'm just sick of having to console mothers who are losing kids because they're lacing this stuff with fentanyl, and they maybe make one mistake, and then all of a sudden they lose a child. Biden laughs about fentanyl. He was talking about one family, and he was chuckling the other day there. He doesn't care about the amount of drugs that are pouring across the border. He's not doing anything. He doesn't care about the criminal aliens that are pouring across the border. I mean, people like Maduro in Venezuela, they're emptying jails, and they're sending folks to our southern border. You have people on the terror watch list that are coming across the southern border. That's just not me saying it. That's Biden's own DHS saying that. We even had people affiliated with the CCP coming across our southern border. So this is something that I think states should be responding to. Obviously, the federal government should be doing it. But in Florida, we've leaned in on day one against illegal immigration. They told me, you can't do that in Florida because we have a lot of Hispanic voters there. And I can tell you this, we've been very tough on immigration, and the people that have supported me the most have been Latino voters in the state of Florida. They want strong borders. They want the rule of law enforced. So we've done things like ban sanctuary cities in the state of Florida. We sued Biden, and we have won at the district court level against his catch and release policies because they're not legal. We also have to deal with people trying to come directly into Florida by sea. And so we have boats coming from Haiti or Cuba. And yeah, the Coast Guard, it's their responsibility, and they by and large do a really good job, but they're undermanned. Biden doesn't want to send as many ships as we need. So we're now under a state of emergency where I've marshaled all of Florida's marine resources. We're out there interdicting these boats, working with the Coast Guard, and so far in the last 6 months, we've repatriated 11,000 illegal aliens back to Haiti and back to some of these places. But the frustrating thing about all this is that you don't get much attention, certainly from Biden's administration, the corporate media. A lot of people just don't want to, they want to pretend that this problem doesn't exist. The only time I saw any of these folks get concerned about illegal immigration was when 50 illegal aliens showed up in beautiful Martha's Vineyard. Then they got really upset about it. They don't care that these poor border towns have thousands and thousands of people going through, that the cartels are running the show. They don't care about that. But when you have 50 show up in one of the wealthiest enclaves in the world, an enclave, mind you, that billed itself as a sanctuary jurisdiction. They actually had an office in their little downtown that said, nobody's illegal, you know, we accept everyone from around the world. That's what they were advertising, and yet when they had 50 show up, did they integrate them in the community? No. They called out the National Guard and they deported them off Martha's Vineyard the next day. These liberal elites want to impose their policies on you, but they don't want to have to deal with the consequences of their ideology or their policies. And we were able to expose that. Texas has exposed it by sending to Manhattan and some of these other places. But I think if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We shouldn't have open borders, but if the left is imposing open borders, then the illegals should go to sanctuary jurisdictions, not to Florida, not to Pennsylvania. And a big part of the solution, no doubt, is the construction of a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. You need to have a wall because if you don't, you always could have an administration that doesn't care about enforcing it. The wall is a fact of life. People can't just get over it. They try to go around when you don't have the wall completed. And so what I've told people is, we have some experience in construction in Florida. We just had a major hurricane come through Southwest Florida. Some of you may know people down there, have family or friends down there. Major hurricane, and among other things, it knocked out bridges going to Pine Island and the Sanibel Island. The causeway was severed in 3 different places. Now, these were not state bridges. They were not our roads, but the locals were being told it's going to take 6 months to get those bridges back in working order, and so you just have to find a way to evacuate. And those islands would have died if that would have happened. So they came to me and said, Governor, can you help us? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to help. So I got my team together and I said, listen, I don't want any red tape. I don't want any bureaucracy. I don't want any of this stuff. I just want this stuff built. So let's start now and get it done. And so we took over the job for Pine Island, and they feared that they were going to be out for 6 months, and we rebuilt the bridge in 3 days. And so I just raised that because I am willing to send my Florida people down to the southern border to build the wall. Put us in, Coach. Come on, Joe. We'll do it. We'll get it done. We also protect our citizens against the wages of the Biden border crisis. And when I became governor, a lot of people said in Florida, you can't be strong on immigration because Republicans rely on Hispanic voters. Well, I was stronger on immigration than any governor in history, and I won the highest percentage of Latino voters in 2022 of anybody in history. So that's not true. So we've done things like ban sanctuary cities in the state of Florida. We sued Biden and won, and we may end up eliminating his catch and release program as a result. We are not a border state in terms of the southern border, but we're a maritime state, and we have boats coming in from Haiti and all these other places trying to dump people in Florida. So we're under a state of emergency. I have Florida maritime assets working with the Coast Guard, and since August, we've been able to interdict and repatriate over 11,000 illegal aliens, send back to Haiti, send back to Cuba, making sure that we're enforcing the rule of law. Very important. Here's the thing. You have fentanyl coming across the border. Overdoses are spiking all across the United States. You do have criminal aliens coming across. You have people that DHS says, not me, DHS says is on the terrorist watch list. We know we have people from China that have come across the southern border. So this affects communities everywhere, and yet our legacy media doesn't really care about that. They don't care about the fentanyl overdoses. They don't care about the criminal aliens. They don't care about the lawlessness. They only seem to care when 50 illegal aliens showed up at beautiful Martha's Vineyard. Then they got really upset about that because it was puncturing their little cocoon. And this was a very wealthy enclave that had advertised itself as being a sanctuary city. Even though these border towns are getting overrun, they advertise 50 was too much for them to bear, so they called out the National Guard and deported them within 24 hours. So these are people, these leftist elites, they want to impose their vision on society, but they don't want to have to suffer the consequences of that vision. They want you to suffer the consequences. They want all of us to suffer. And so I think we really expose that with that issue. But it needs to be taken care of. So in Florida, we're leaning in on it, and we're going to continue to do that. And I think our state is safer as a result.
National immigration policy. Would you build a wall, and would you use the military to go after these Mexican drug cartels that are bringing over fentanyl that's killing tens of thousands of Americans?
Yes and yes. I've said publicly. I've always supported the wall just because it's such a big border, you can have border patrol. You never will be able to have enough. So the cartels will direct people where there's not surveillance, and so you have to have that. I think it's important. And what I've told people publicly is, if Joe Biden wants to get serious about that, give me a call. We had a situation where we had a hurricane come through Southwest Florida, knocked out a bridge going to Pine Island, severed the causeway to Sanibel in 3 different places. They were not state bridges, but locals came to me, said, can you help us? Because we're stranded and we can't wait 6 months. So I got my guys together. I said, listen, we're going to take this over. No bureaucracy, no red tape, no excuses. I want those bridges operating as quickly as possible. So instead of 6 months, we did Pine Island in 3 days. And instead of 6 months, we did Sanibel in 3 weeks. And I raise that only because I'm willing to send our Florida guys down to the border and get them building the wall, and they will do it very quickly. So just let me know. We'll do it. We also have to understand these cartels are running the show. And it's the government, they run the government basically down there. It's totally corrupt. But they are running people into our country, and they are running massive amounts of fentanyl into our country that's killing tens of thousands of Americans. It's killing people in Florida communities. Like, I love how the media will sometimes say, like, oh, it's a border. Why do you care about it? You're not at the southern border. Reality is this fentanyl gets all over the country, and you have families that are losing kids. And what they'll do is they'll put the fentanyl in something that maybe the kid shouldn't be doing, but is normally not fatal. But if it's laced with enough fentanyl, that could be lights out. And you can know that's it. And so it's something that's really, really significant. And we know the cartels are doing it. And so the idea that somehow we just absorb this with impunity without doing anything in response, and you got, there's a lot of things you got to consider, but the idea that we can just let this happen, I think is wrong. Now, you're going to see a massive disaster this week with the expiration of Title 42. We've always said, we sent people to help Texas 2021. But what was happening is people were coming, we were stopping, and then the Border Patrol would just release. And I'm like, well, why is that a good use of resource? If we're interdicting before they come across the border or putting them back over the border, then that's a good use. If Texas is going to start doing that now, which maybe they are, I'm trying to figure out what they're doing, we've said we will send people to help in that effort. Because I think the idea that you come illegally and then you get to go wherever you want in the interior of the country, that's not a deterrent, and that's not going to end up working. So I think you need to see some serious action. Well, thanks everybody for who was involved with this. We're excited. We've got more in the hopper. We've got a lot of other good stuff, and so we'll be processing those in the days ahead. But we're just excited to be putting up a lot of points on the board and basically saying we said we were going to do a lot of things, and we did it, and that's the way it should be. Okay, any questions back there? Yes.
A little bit more if CBDC and Title 42 will be things that you will discuss even further if you do decide to announce a presidential run.
Well, obviously, I would say the border should be shut down. This is ridiculous what's going on. You shut it down. You do need to construct a wall. I said, you guys saw us build those bridges. I'll send those people down to the southern border to build. I'll do that. We'll get it done. You also need to just have a policy. If you come across the border illegally, you get sent back. You don't get a notice to appear for a trial in 2 years. What kind of a deterrent is that? It doesn't work. We also have to come to terms with all the amount of fentanyl that's coming into our country because of this border. And who's doing it? It's these Mexican drug cartels. They need to be held accountable. We can't just let our people die. And then in terms of CBDC, obviously it should just be nixed in the executive branch. And what Biden did, just stop it and say, we're not going to do that. So that's an easy thing to stop federally if you have an administration that's so inclined to do it. Okay, next. Yes, ma'am.
He said, if you were president today, what would your plan be at the border?
Well, it's just kind of what I said. We'd shut it down. We would not entertain any of these bogus asylum claims at the border. First of all, when you do an asylum claim, you're supposed to go to a port of entry. This is not break into the country, then claim asylum. That's not the way it works. You also have to apply for asylum in a safe country, your first safe country you get to. So if you have somebody crossing 5 countries to get to our southern border, that is not valid asylum. They would have had to have done that. So just rejecting that idea, having them wait in Mexico if they do have a potentially valid claim before that can be done, you're removing the incentives for them to want to come to begin with. They're coming now because Biden has told them anybody can come. And once you come, you know you're going to end up getting back. You also need to take all the people that came for Biden, and they do need to be sent back to their home country. There's no other way you can do this unless you're willing to send back. So you got to send back, and you've got to do that. And but I also think there are a lot of leverage points that the United States has vis-a-vis Mexico. You know, you have this Mexican president. He's criticizing Florida for enacting laws against illegal immigration. It's like he's got a disaster on his hands. He's got cartels that are totally out of control that are running his country. And all the millions of people coming into our country, they're all going through his country. I mean, what kind of a country just allows people by the millions to just traverse through like that? So I think that there's a lot of leverage points that can be used. And I think that they do need to do it. But, you know, that's a day one issue. I mean, you've got to be really, really determined. You can't let it slide. You can't make excuses. You got to go in, and you got to really go in with all guns blazing and using all the leverage that you have to be able to do it. It's important for the substantive issue of immigration is about what is in the best interest of the American people. No foreigner has a right to come to this country. You, as Americans, have a right to enact laws that provide whatever type of process you deem appropriate for that. But you can't have people coming in superseding the rule of law and just doing it on their own. And so that's something that's important to just validate that idea that we actually do, as Americans, control our immigration system. The other thing is, do you control the sovereignty of your country or not? I can guarantee you these other countries would not allow massive numbers of people to pour in illegally. I mean, they would put their foot down. And so clearly you should do that. It's also the policy about the types of people that are coming in. They're coming from all over the world because they know if you just get to that border, that's a ticket inside the interior of the United States. So you've got people, I mean, I went there when we had people down there helping Texas. You know, there were people from Libya. There were people from the Middle East. I mean, there were people from all over the place that were going there. We have no idea who the heck any of these people are. Some are criminal aliens. There's no question about that. I mean, Maduro has released people from prison to go to the border. I mean, we know some of those folks. So that's a problem. Obviously, the drugs are a problem. They're all major problems substantively, but I think it's also just a bigger issue than even that. This country doesn't get things right anymore. I mean, part of the thing with the hurricane when we responded, a lot of people here were very appreciative, but it was almost like it was unexpected that government could actually do a decent job at anything, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I kind of think like if this happened like during World War II, we would have gotten the border secured in like 72 hours. It would have been done. There would have been no questions about any of this. And so we need a little bit of that can-do spirit. And that's, I mean, heck, with just these bridges. I mean, we could have twisted, you know, we could have wrung our hands, gone through the bureaucracy. We said, no, let's do it. And so we did it. And I think that's similar with the border. I think it'd be a big deal for the country to get that right. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Parlors popping up all over Southwest Florida. So I just want to ask do you have a problem with that, and are you seeing that being any alarming increases in?
So I am not privy to exactly what's been, as you know, we have a gaming commission now, and there's a lot of that is done that doesn't get to my desk. So basically, we have rules in place, and I think the goal is just to follow whatever those rules are. Of course, we did do we did a compact with the Seminole tribe. They had not been paying anything to the state. They have the most profitable casinos in America here. And so we were able to start getting, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. That got held up in court. We think we're going to ultimately win that and then get those payments. They're in escrow. That'll be released. That'll actually help the budget surplus that we have. So you do. And then there's different rules about, okay, what can you do? What can you not do? So I think they just need to be enforced fairly and whatever it is. But I am not privy to exactly what action has been taken, just because that enforcement is now being done, short of my office. Great to see everybody. We will be back soon. God bless you all. Look, I look at the issue of the border, and there's some people in the media, some people on certain political persuasions that just dismiss it as kind of a Texas problem or an Arizona problem. But I'm here to tell you, when you don't have control of your own border, that's an American problem. And it's not just about, and there's a lot of bad stuff going on here. Hopefully we'll hear some stories today. But this impacts communities all throughout this country. And I can tell you it impacts Florida because we, like every single state in this country, have seen an increase in fentanyl overdose deaths over these last 3 or 4 years, but particularly over the last 2 years. And that means that these are mothers that are losing kids as a result of what's being brought across the border. Obviously, you guys see it the most, which is the sheer number of people. But even in communities far away from here, you have thousands of illegal aliens that will show up. What does that do for medical care? What does that do for education? What does that do for criminal justice? All these different things that it imposes serious burdens on community when you don't have control over who's coming in and out of your country. And nobody knows who's coming in. When I was here, so we've sent people to Texas on 2 occasions. We did in 2021 with the initial Biden surge because of his failed policies. And I went down there, and people act like it's people coming, that these are Mexicans coming in. I didn't see a single Mexican coming in, but there were people from halfway around the world coming through on this southern border because they know all you got to do is show up on the border and you're going to get a ticket to come into the interior of the United States. There were people I was reading from Tajikistan coming to the southern border. I remember seeing Libya. They now have, I think they've identified about 10,000 Chinese nationals coming across the southern border. Our own government acknowledges that you've had a significant number of people on its own terrorist watch list that have come across the border, and we know there have been a lot of criminal aliens that have come across the border. So this is a huge problem. We're going to do something about it. In terms of some of the cost of this, though, we've done a lot in Florida. One of the things we did, I have a tool in Florida where I can ask the state Supreme Court to impanel what's called a statewide grand jury. And basically, it's a grand jury that has wide investigatory power. It can do criminal indictments and things like that, but even short of that, it can subpoena, it can get documents, and it can issue reports. And so we did one about illegal immigration, and particularly about people being brought into the state of Florida, because a lot of this stuff is coordinated with non-governmental organizations and other types of people that are basically working in concert to evade immigration laws. And they were able to get a lot of evidence. They produced some reports. Are going to do more. But one of the things that I think was most shocking about this is how these children are being treated. So what you will say is, if you're just like an adult male and you try to come across, your chance of staying is less than if you have a kid in tow. And so what they do is they identified a bunch of examples of this, but there's just one example. There was a lady from, I think, Honduras. She had 4 kids, and she wanted to come, to the United States. And there were these other men who wanted to come to the United States. All of them had been deported at least once, some multiple times. She rented out her kids to these adult males, and then they all went across the border. And because there was a kid, it was fake. That gave them a leg up to stand. So this is what our government is incentivizing, that type of conduct. Could you imagine possibly renting out your own kid to somebody who probably doesn't have great intentions coming into this country? So it's created, I think, a real human catastrophe because of what the government's doing. And in Florida, Chip mentioned we've taken action. We've done things like ban sanctuary cities. We have employment verification. If you bring people into the state illegally, you get stiff penalties now in the state of Florida, and it's having a huge impact. People know we're just going to do it legally. We're not going to mess with this, and that's positive. But one of the things we did, we're not a southern border state, but we are a maritime border state, and so it doesn't get as much fanfare, but we have people try to run illegally with boats into the Florida Keys in particular and other parts of South Florida. Haiti, the Bahamas, Cuba, you name it. And so this is the Coast Guard's responsibility to take care of this, and they do a good job, but they do not have enough resources to stop all the boats. And so we were in a situation where Coast Guard started dumping some people in the Florida Keys, and then you had some boats coming through. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not going to do this. And so I declared a state of emergency. We surged all of our marine assets to fill the gaps where the Coast Guard wasn't able to do. And so what happens is you have a boat, maybe there'll be 15 Haitians on it coming illegally. You stop the boat, you bring the Haitians to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard deports them back to Haiti. And guess what happened once people saw that that was likely to be the result of them trying to enter illegally? The number of boats plummeted that were trying to even come in the first place. Why would you want to get into a ragtag vessel, go hundreds of miles potentially in very hostile waters sometimes, knowing that the only thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to go right back where you started from? People aren't going to do that. And the same principle applies here at the southern border. If they come and know what'll be happen is they'll get a sheet of paper saying come up for a court date in 3 years and just go enjoy the United States, well, then they're going to do that. If they come and if they're denied entry or if they're immediately repatriated, well, guess what? People are not going to want to mess with this. They're not going to pay some coyote thousands of dollars to be able to do it because they know the United States enforces its laws, and that's just the way it is. So we have to reestablish the rule of law in this country. We have to make sure that people understand that there's a sanction to violating the law. We also
Before that, if law enforcement believes that someone is crossing and is involved in illegal drug trafficking, that law enforcement should be able to open fire. And secondly, when you talked about direct action, you want to be able to take direct action against the cartels. If you mean sending the military over the border into Mexico to take that action?
So we will use all levers at our disposal to win the fight. I think if you look at if somebody is breaking through the border wall, which they are doing in other parts, demonstrating hostile intent or hostile action, you have to be able to meet that with the appropriate use of force. I don't see how you can just let them do that and carve through a wall on sovereign U.S. territory with a backpack full of drugs. And so of course you use deadly force. I mean, how would you let somebody just break into your house and do you harm? No, and I could tell you in Texas they wouldn't do that. Try that in Texas. Why is our country any different? And these guys will bring like blowtorches. They have a huge thing that the cartels are doing. And how embarrassing is it that we have in the places we have a wall? I was there the other day in Arizona. They're repairing the wall because they busted through the wall. I mean, that is just unacceptable. And I tell you, if you drop a couple of these cartel operatives trying to do that, you're not going to have to worry about that anymore. They will not mess. They're only messing with it because they know they can get away with it. We also need to remove the incentives to come illegally to begin with. And that means employment. That means taxpayer financed benefit. It also means this idea that you can come across the border 2 days later, have a child, and somehow that's an American citizen. That was not the original understanding of the 14th Amendment. And so we'll take action to force a clarification of that. But I think it's wrong that people would use our country for things like birth tourism. So we're going to be removing the incentives to come into this country illegally. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, we are going to treat the Mexican drug cartels as the threat that they are. They are responsible for coming into our country and killing tens of thousands of Americans. And yet, the ruling class in D.C., both Republicans and Democrats through the years, have basically just shrugged their shoulders. And so the carnage continues to mount. We are going to be designating the cartels either transnational criminal organizations or federal foreign terrorist organizations. There's different legal things that come from each, but we're going to make sure we have an appropriate designation so that it unlocks our ability to hold the cartels accountable, both in terms of finance, but also in terms of any direct action that may be needed to be able to curtail and ultimately defeat the cartels. It is humiliating as a country to not have control over our own territory. This border behind us, in spite of all the great efforts of Texas and Florida sent people, this border, because of the neglect of the Biden administration, because of their intentional failures, this border is controlled by the Mexican drug cartels. That is a disgrace. That is horrific. And yet that is exactly what is happening. What has happened since Joe Biden took office? Millions and millions of illegal aliens have poured into this country. And yes, there have been criminal aliens that have come in. There have been people that our own government says are on the terror watch list. There are people that have been deported multiple times already who are coming back into this country. That is not good for the American people, and that's not limited to just these border towns. We've had instances in Florida where people have been killed by people that have come across the border illegally under Biden's watch. It's unacceptable and it needs to stop. When you have this many people, mass migration at this scale represents a huge burden on communities. It represents a burden on taxpayers. It represents a burden on medical, on education, on criminal justice. And it's not just limited to towns in South Texas. We're seeing the impact in communities all across the United States of America. It's also, what we're seeing here is profoundly unfair to American citizens who are having to bear the brunt of this illegal migration. It's also unfair to legal immigrants who've actually navigated the process like they're supposed to. It's almost like they could have saved a lot of time and been better off had they just shown up at the border illegally. What kind of message is that sending to people who are actually doing the right thing? You notice vast expanses of this southern border does not have a border wall. The federal government has not gotten that job done. That's made it so much easier for people to be able to come to this country illegally. I note that Texas has had to put up barbed wire. They've had to put up different types of boxes to deter people. And I'm glad that they're doing that. But honestly, this is a national border. This is the border for the United States. It should be the national government, the federal government, who's coming in and securing it. And yes, I support the states stepping up in these instances, but this is a major failure that people are allowed to come in the way they are. Big difference. I was proud to be able to, at that debate, muscle in issues that maybe the moderators didn't necessarily want to talk about. And one of those issues was the issue of our southern border. I'm going to be the president that finally puts this issue to bed. We are going to solve the problem. No more slogans, no more rhetoric, no more empty promises. We're going to get it done. And that means on day one, we're going to declare it to be a national emergency. We're going to mobilize all available resources, including the U.S. military, to stop the invasion, to make sure, yes, we're going to build the border wall, but we're going to lean in against the Mexican drug cartels because they are killing tens of thousands of our fellow citizens every year with virtually no pushback. They have more control over what's going on at our southern border than our own U.S. government does, and that is an absolute disgrace. And it's something that people will say, and so a lot of the elite media will say, oh, it's a border, because we've done things in Florida. I've sent people to the southern border to help Texas, our National Guard and our Florida law enforcement. We transported illegals, aliens to Martha's Vineyard and did that. And, and media's like, oh, well, you're not a border state. Well, actually, we're a maritime state, so I have boats working with the Coast Guard. We're stopping boats from Haiti and other places where they're coming illegally and putting them back, and it's effective when you're willing to do that. So, but people say, oh, well, why do you care? Like, you're not on the border. Biden has made every community in this country a border community because the fentanyl is flowing every place in this country. And I think about my kids, 6, 5, and 3, and they're too young to where they're going out and doing their own thing. But from a parent's perspective, you now have to be in a situation, if you have teenage kids or college-age kids, they can go out and be somewhere, and they can take like a pill thinking it's like a Xanax or something. And if that's laced with fentanyl, they could die right there on the spot. That's how dangerous this stuff is. I've met a bunch of these mothers. They're called angel mothers. Mothers who have lost a child to fentanyl overdose. And it's almost always where the child was not trying to take fentanyl, thought that they were taking something else that had been laced, and that's all she wrote at that point. And when you have mothers that are thinking, okay, if the government would have done something about this, then their kids would still be with us. So how could we be so neglectful and dismissive as a country of all the damage that is being done? So what I've said and pledged is we are going to treat the drug cartels like foreign terrorist organizations because they are killing more Americans than any terrorist organization, including Al-Qaeda, have ever been managed to do. So that means we're going to use lethal force against the Mexican drug cartels. When they're coming across the border, with fentanyl in their backpacks, and you've seen the videos and pictures. Sometimes they're armed, sometimes they have a backpack with the drugs in it. Our border's wide open. We do have pieces of a border wall, but it's mostly wide open. But with the places where there are the wall, they actually cut through the wall, and they just come right in. When I'm president, if they are doing things like that and breaking into our country with fentanyl that's going to kill our citizens, we're going to shoot them stone cold dead. They are going to be done, and we are not going to put up with this anymore. But one of the things that I think people started to think about when they saw the attack and kind of it settled in about what happened, Israel's got probably the strongest border security in the world, and yet this was able to happen. What is going to happen with our country with an open border? I mean, do you not think our enemies have wanted to utilize that over the last 2 years? Of course they have. We know people from Iran have come in, and China, and Russia, and the Middle East. There's people 140 on the terror watch list that we know of have come through the southern border. So, and there will be, as much as I hate to say it, and I hope to God I'm wrong, but I'm not, there's going to be a terrorist attack in this country that we're going to be able to trace back to the southern border at some point in the future. Just the math doesn't lie. You can't have this many people coming in. So we need to get smart about what we're doing. You can't just have your country where the inmates are running the asylum. You can't let the Mexican drug cartels rule the roost. You've got to defend this country. We will do that for sure. But we also have to be smart about who we're letting in knowingly and legally. This idea that anyone can come anywhere in the world, I don't think is in the best interest of this country. That's why I was the first person of note to come out and say, because you had some of these people, these very far left, saying we should import hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Gaza Strip. I said no to that. That is not in this country's interest. Because I remember after September 11th, 2001, when terrorists knocked down the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, I recall Israel standing in solidarity, every country in Europe, heck, even Russia and China were not openly celebrating it. The one that I remember celebrating it were Palestinian Arabs in the Gaza Strip. and in Judea and Samaria. I remember that very distinctly. It was a searing memory to see that happen. And so people will say in the media, and some politicians say, well, not everyone in the Gaza Strip is a terrorist. Not everyone in the Gaza Strip is Hamas. Well, look, they elected Hamas. I mean, let's just be honest. They were cheering in the street after October 11th attack. They were very supportive of that. But the question about who you're importing into the country, the threshold just can't be, are you a terrorist or not? Because there's a lot of bad that can come from people that may not quite be to that level. And what I pointed out here is what they've done. And people will say that Israel is occupying Gaza. They pulled out of Gaza in 2005. They forcibly uprooted their own Israeli citizens and removed them. It was a very traumatic thing. So the people of Gaza had a choice about, okay, you're governing yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to build an economy, build opportunity? No, they elected Hamas. Money that goes in there, Hamas uses it to finance tunnels and terrorist infrastructure, rockets. That's what's happened. That's the choice that they made. And so you're in a situation where, yes, it's not a question of terrorists or not. Of course you don't let it a terrorist. But they are taught in the Gaza Strip to hate Jews. They are taught to hate Israel. They are taught that Israel should not exist. The textbooks that they use does not even have Israel on the map. So they're conditioning each generation to basically seek a second Holocaust. So to bring in people with that, even if you're not a member of Hamas, I don't want to import those pathologies from the Middle East into this country. That will increase anti-Semitism in this country if you do it, and it will increase anti-Americanism in this country if you do it. And we've got to stop being politically correct about this and start calling a spade a spade. And we definitely don't want to be like Europe. I mean, look at what Europe has done with its immigration, knowingly importing millions and millions of people who reject their culture and are trying to bring in their own culture and all the dysfunction of that. So now you look at a place like Germany, they have more anti-Semitism today than at any time since Adolf Hitler. And that is anti-Semitism that's largely been imported into their country by really, really stupid politicians. And so we're gonna keep this country safe. We're gonna keep this country secure. But there are elites around the world, and there are elites here who are willing to do very dumb things, and that puts our people at risk. We're not going to